No, you just took that out altogether. You can't, though. How do you take it all out?
We good to go?
All right, well, we'll get to it.
All right. I want to call this meeting of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority to order. Are there anybody signed up for public comments?
No public comment.
Very good. Okay. Adoption of minutes, item number 3. I believe, Raymond, if you told me correctly, there was a typo and we approved January 16th of 2008, which should have been 2009.
That's correct.
And also February 19th of 2009. I had an opportunity to review those minutes. Unless there's any questions, additions, changes, comments, is there a motion to approve same?
Move to approve with said changes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Item number 4, discussion and action on board resolution recognizing the reappointment of Commissioner Ted Houghton to the Texas Transportation Commission.
Move to approve.
Second?
Seconded.
Any discussion? I think Mr. Houghton's doing yeoman service for us.
Do we need to read it
Any-
into the minutes?
Pardon?
Do we need to read it into the minutes? We did the other one.
Okay. We'll just, let's, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Whereas Mr. Ted Houghton, a native of the city of El Paso, is a commissioner of the Texas Transportation Commission, which oversees the statewide activities of the Texas Department of Transportation. Whereas Commissioner Houghton, having served on the TTC since his initial appointment by Governor Perry in December of 2003, is currently the senior member of the TTC and has the distinction to have been the first El Paso resident to have served on the Texas Transportation Commission. And whereas Commissioner Houghton was recently appointed to the Texas Transportation Commission by Governor Perry for an additional term of 6 years, and the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority recognizes the importance of this reappointment to our region and to the state transportation system in general. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority that the authority hereby expresses its support of the recent reappointment of Commissioner Ted Houghton as a member of the Texas Transportation Commission of the Texas Department of Transportation, and that the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority hereby congratulates Commissioner Houghton on this very important reappointment for the region and the state of Texas. Texas passed and approved this 19th day of March 2009.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I might suggest an addition to this. When I was in high school, we knew Mr. Houghton as Teddy. So perhaps we could put Teddy in parentheses on this resolution?
No, let's leave it alone.
You think so?
There's a few other nicknames that I have for Ted.
Okay.
And we
So
can't
therefore,
add those. So
we'll just decide not to go there.
Actually, the only other thing, there's nothing here that talks about, it talks about his being a commissioner and having been appointed by the governor, but I might add an additional whereas to say that he has done an outstanding job as not just a commissioner, but also as the chair of the commission. And
Okay, he's not the chair.
He's not the chair.
but he was.
No.
Oh, he was never been the chair? Then I think, at the very least, we ought to acknowledge the great effort that he's made. I understand this is, I was looking for some language here talking about the good work he's done, and I don't see anything reflected in this resolution. And
I can do that if someone will move to amend.
I would move to amend to reflect also on the outstanding work that he has done as a commissioner, and that we're not just looking to have him appointed. Certainly he serves this region. He's done a great job for the state of Texas, no question about that. But also we need to acknowledge what outstanding work he's done as a commissioner.
Is there a second to the motion to amend?
Seconded.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? So we will include
I'll include a recital referring to some of the language that Mr. Berg has provided.
Is that satisfactory, Mr. Berg?
Yes, absolutely.
Item number 5, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute a financial assistance agreement with Texas Department of Transportation for the development of a regional toll plan for the toll projects identified within the 2008 Comprehensive Mobility Plan. Loop 375 Southern Corridor Phase 1, Loop 375 Southern Corridor Phase 2, Loop 375 Southern Corridor Phase 3, and Northeast Parkway Phase 1. Mr. Tejas.
Raymond Tejas, Executive Director for the Camino Real RMA, for the record. As a reminder, the Comprehensive Mobility Plan, which the RMA is pursuing, has essentially two types of projects that the RMA is pursuing. One of them is a group of pass-through toll projects that we refer to as the RED projects. And if you remember, we went to the Texas Transportation Commission several months back and received $2.2 million to begin pursuit of those. And that's a review of those projects and pre-development and pre-construction work on those three pass-through projects. What we are now doing, and in fact, you may remember from last month, we went back to the Texas Transportation Commission and asked for an additional $1.1 million in toll equity loans for the development, essentially, of a regional toll plan, which will help us review and in fact, will help our GEC to review each of those toll projects that are identified within the Comprehensive Mobility Plan. What we'll do, essentially, is go through each of the projects, look at the estimates, look at the project limits, look at the timing currently proposed, and really just break out all the projects to give us a roadmap from which we can then go out and begin development of our toll projects. So what you see before you here is item number 5 is authorization for me to execute the final financial assistance agreement. And that, I should mention also, I will be back in Austin for the final hearing of this item before the TTC next Thursday. And upon their approval, then I will be authorized to sign that agreement immediately thereafter. And that leads into the next item. So that's what that's for. Essentially, item 5 is to authorize me to sign an agreement for $1.1 million in total equity funding.
Mr. Burke, go ahead and ask your normal question.
Nothing will be spent without pre-approval of the board as a whole.
Well, now on this one, what you're essentially doing is authorizing the execution of the agreement. From there, you'll see item number 6, which is the authorization to sign a related agreement, which then authorizes the general engineering consultant to begin work. So you're essentially authorizing us to begin the work with these two items.
But all of it is in coordination with TxDOT and what TxDOT is asking.
Absolutely, and in fact, I think to get really to your point, the expenditures that are then provided by invoice to the RMA are provided to the RMA first. We review them, and then we forward them on to TxDOT. If TxDOT refuses payment on any item, we're not held liable, and the RMA and the GEC does not get paid for that.
That's exactly what I wanted you to say.
Absolutely.
That's what I meant by your...
No, that's what I wanted him to say. So it was perfect.
Okay. I'd just like to point out that this is part of the process that's a continuation of the Comprehensive Mobility Plan. It's not a new thing. It is a portion of the plan that was approved by both City Council and the MPO.
That's correct.
And as well as this board. So any further discussion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Item number 6, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute work authorization number 2 with a Post Buckley, is that Shoe? Is that right? And Jernigan, PBS&J from this point forward in regard to the development of the regional toll plan for the toll projects described within the financial assistance agreement between the CRRMA and the Texas Department of Transportation. Mr. Tejas.
Yes, sir. Now, this, as we were discussing, and directly to Mr. Berg's point, this work authorization number 2 then gets reviewed by TxDOT for sufficiency, really. They give us the thumbs up or the thumbs down, or maybe they'll ask for some revisions. Once this is signed, then the GEC can actually begin work. So this is again, this is the agreement between the RMA and the GEC to actually go forward and develop the regional toll plan.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, Mr. Tejas, we're not necessarily moving forward on building a toll road. We're looking at the viability, the need, et cetera, et cetera. Is that correct?
That's really about it. At this point, if you'll remember, all of the projects identified as toll projects, and in fact, all of the projects within the comprehensive mobility plan that the RMA is looking at have been developed to date by TxDOT. So we don't know the specifics of those projects. We don't know the exact project limits. We don't know the estimates. We don't know any of those details. So that's what this item is really for, is for us to be brought up to speed and begin to determine which projects make most sense to begin pursuit of.
Okay.
Was this a negotiated amount? I mean, where did the amount come from? Was it a?
The amount came from basically the needs. The GEC came to us and we spoke about what is it that we're looking at, and the GEC, I believe, spoke also with TxDOT about the initial review and evaluation of the existing projects, and that's the number that they are
Based upon a set number of hours, or based upon a particular task?
Well, if you'll note in the agreement itself, it has 3 separate tasks, and then those tasks are broken down by estimated hours.
But we're certain that this is in line with the going rate and that there's no...
Absolutely, and in fact,
I'm just trying to be very transparent.
Absolutely, but that's an important point. This work authorization, you're authorizing me to sign it. However, it requires and is subject to TxDOT review and approval. So if TxDOT doesn't feel that the numbers are in line, I'm not going to sign it, and I'll bring it back as a revision.
And the funds come from TxDOT as well.
That's right. That's right. And I would note that's actually a very valid, very important point as well. If, for example, we spend $50,000 on project, one of the proposed toll projects, and the RMA does not pursue that project, all that we're responsible for at that point is to turn over any work product that we've created on it. We're not responsible for the $50,000.
Very good. So I move to approve.
Second. Any further discussion? None. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Item number 7, presentation by the Texas Department of Transportation on the market valuation process. Eduardo?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Eduardo Calvo with TxDOT in the El Paso office. I'm just waiting for the presentation to be, there we go. We made this presentation to you all before a few months ago. Just wanted to bring it up again because this is something that we need to move. And when I say we, this is the market valuation process is a negotiation between TxDOT and the RMA. A very important player in all of this will be the MPO as well, but technically this is a negotiation between the RMA and TxDOT. Very specifically, on one of the toll projects that Mr. Tejas mentioned as part of the comprehensive mobility plan that we also presented to you all a few months ago, the Cesar Chavez Loop 375 widening project. That is going to be one of the first projects and to be developed here in the region, hopefully with the RMA. But we need to move forward with that very quickly. So the purpose of giving you a refresher on the market valuation is because we need to start moving on the negotiations for the Loop 375 Cesar Chavez project, which is the Prop 14 that you've heard will be funded with Proposition 14 funds. So let me start very quickly. Market valuation really starts with Senate Bill 792 that was passed a couple years ago. Some of the general objectives was to provide for greater involvement by the local entities. There was some issues in other regions in the state where the local tolling entity and TxDOT were not really seeing eye to eye in terms of how are they going to be addressing the comprehensive development agreement, some of the toll roads up there. So it was one of the results to enable a process where all of this could be done in a more transparent way. It also facilitated the primacy concept where it's crystal clear that the local tolling entity, like in our case here in El Paso, the RMA has primacy, has the first right to develop toll projects. Transparency, estimate the value of each potential new toll road project. This is to try to see if these projects have a potential concession fee type of thing. In other words, when we do the analysis through time, and if we decide or we agree that this project has a positive cash value at the end of the after looking at the revenue stream versus the construction costs, then potentially it has a concession fee. None of our projects, I believe, will have that, so it'll be relatively easy to deal with it. 792 also dealt with a moratorium on CDAs, which, again, applied to other regions, not so much to us. Our role here at the district level, we're going to be pretty much doing leading all the negotiations. We'll be the principal or the primary point of contact for TxDOT with the RMA, and we'll be pretty much leading all the procedures and the negotiations. Getting into market value itself, as I said before, the market value is really the amount of surplus funds that would be available at the end of the day once we estimate the total revenue, the potential total revenue of these projects versus all the construction and maintenance costs and all that. If there is anything left over, in other words, a positive surplus, that would be considered the market value. If there's a negative, then technically it's considered a market value of 0, and we're pretty much done. But there are other things that need to be considered as part of the process, which is really what we need to make sure that we do quickly, is to establish the scope, to make sure that we understand what the scope of the project is. It's a widening from point A to point B, as a toll, as an express toll lane, and so on. And also establish some of the toll terms and conditions. Very basic. Initially, we thought that this was going to be a little more complicated, but as we've seen, and Mr. Tejas has received a couple of market evaluation processes for projects in other regions, it's a relatively simple document. As long as we can agree on a project scope, the initial toll rate, and the toll rate escalation methodology, we're pretty much done. There is obviously due diligence that has to occur on our side and on your side, but I don't think these negotiations are going to take very long, fortunately. The last two bullets on this slide are important. TxDOT and the local toll project entity, in this case the RMA, we can agree to waive the requirement of the market valuation. So all indications lead to that's the preferred road to take, but we still have to go through the actual process. And also the MPO has to approve the terms and conditions that I expressed earlier, the scope of the toll rates and escalation methodology. We have suggested to the MPO Policy Board to create an ad hoc committee that I believe the chair created at the last meeting, so that they can participate and see what is going on. Again, although this technically is a negotiation between the RMA and TxDOT, but the MPO at the end of the day has to approve the terms and conditions. So we want to make sure that they participate from the very beginning so that there are no surprises at the end.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Calvo, does the MPO have to approve the waiver for the market evaluation?
I don't believe so. I don't believe that the waiver is part of the approval, but certainly the terms and conditions and the scope.
Having said that, I think we'd want to make sure that the MPO is fully aware of whatever the negotiations are. And I believe Chairman Pickett, I don't know, who were the members of the ad hoc committee? Do we know at this point?
No, I believe he asked any members of the MPO, of the TPB, to come forward after the meeting. So I haven't heard of a list of actual committee members yet.
Okay. I just think it's very important in this process that the MPO is kept apprised of what we're doing and how we're doing it, because that line of communication is critical.
I think we all agree, and that was the purpose of requesting that from Chairman Pickett.
Very good.
On this slide, we're pretty much showing the whole process. I don't think, unless you want me to go step by step, but I think really the key is to just to concentrate on the fact that we're very likely going to be waiving the market evaluation requirement. That's going to be part of the agreement, and having the MPO approve the terms and conditions. And again, unless you want me to go over the details of all the steps, I'll be happy to do it.
I think we've seen all of this before.
Thank you.
Okay, do you have any questions?
I have
Mr.
one
Caldwell?
question. Is our participation, or is the participation by the RMA considered in the market value analysis? Is the value added by the participation of the RMA considered part of the analysis of the market value of the project as a whole?
No, not really. The market valuation would look at a traffic and revenue study, a very detailed analysis of that, of the revenue potential of the project, regardless of who builds it, whether it's TxDOT or the RMA.
Just want to clarify. So the RMA really, and its participation, is independent of any consideration in the market value process?
Correct. If I may add, as part of the overall development of this project, the market valuation negotiations right now are not part of the critical path. But we want to make sure that we get them done as soon as possible so that they don't become part of the critical path. We really have a lot of, I don't want to say pressure, but the administration in Austin is encouraging us to get this project built as quickly as possible.
Well, we have a timeline. Is that correct, Mr. Calvo, that we're trying to stick to?
Yes.
Okay. And we're reasonably on that timeline at this point.
Reasonably, yes.
Okay. Okay, any other questions of Mr. Calvo? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Item number 8, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute work authorization number 3 between the RMA and PBS&J regarding the market valuation process for the Loop 375 Southern Corridor Phase 1 Cesar Chavez project and any related documentation. Mr. Tejas.
Yes, sir. I had asked Mr. Calvo, and thank you very much, Mr. Calvo, for coming down to provide that briefing. I wanted the board to have a general understanding of where we're headed. So that was the background. So what you see is item number 8 is essentially the next work authorization that we're providing to our GEC to assist us through the market valuation process. As a reminder, in September of 2007, the RMA executed a financial assistance agreement with the Texas Department of Transportation for exactly $330,000. And that money was to be used for the market valuation process in response to Senate Bill 792. We have that money, but we haven't begun any market valuation processes yet. So thankfully, we don't have to go back to the TTC to ask for money for the market valuation process. We already have that. So essentially what we're doing now is entering into an agreement with our GEC to begin spending some of that money and developing this process. So that's what you see before you. And to speak to Mr. Berg's points, all of the same comments apply in that the work authorization number 3 has to be reviewed and approved by TxDOT in advance, and more importantly, before release, TxDOT will be assisting in a review of these invoices.
Move to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? None. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Item number 9, presentation on the design build delivery method and the related procurement process by the RMA's GEC.
If I could just real briefly, thank you for joining us also. I asked the general engineering consultant to come down and provide a brief presentation to the board as well on the design build procurement process, because that's what we're beginning to pursue for the Americas Interchange project, the Comprehensive Mobility Plan direct connectors. So what I've asked is that they come down and brief you on exactly what this process is and how it works, so that when the action items begin coming to you, you're not caught unaware. So that's really what we're doing, and this is Kim Daly from our general engineering consultant. So thank you. for joining us.
Thanks for joining us, Ms. Daly.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me. I have a lot of slides here, but I'm going to run through these pretty quickly, and I'm going to try to point out the key items that I think we need to make sure we get across today. We're going to talk a little bit about design bid build, the traditional delivery method versus design build, and then the benefits of design build, and then we'll go through the process a little bit. And we'll also talk a little bit about the timeline. Oops, wrong way. All right, design bid build versus design build. First, I want to point out, not every project is going to be suited for design build delivery. You will have to take a look at that as we go through the development of some of these projects. But there are some advantages to doing jobs on design using a design build delivery method. You want me to bring it up? Okay. All right. I just feel like I'm like screaming. Okay. All right. So using a design build delivery method, there are some advantages. Definitely a quicker schedule in some aspects. Singular responsibility. It's the same entity that's doing both the design and the construction of your project. Reduced risk, that can be weighted either way, and we can talk about that too as we get further into the discussion. Reduced costs. So sometimes what you're going to see is during the procurement phase, you're not going to see reduced costs. Sometimes a procurement, especially if you have a complicated contract, can actually be a little bit more than a traditional, but you will see some advantages towards the end. But again, not every project is going to be suited for design build delivery method. All right. Some of the advantages of design build, again, we go through these: singular responsibility, same entity responsible for both designing and construction. Quality. You guys are going to be setting the quality, the quality program through the technical provisions that we prepare through the contract documents. That's very important. Cost savings, again, the innovative use of materials, efficiency during construction. Some of these are like cost-saving items. And then time-saving items, the overlapping of design and construction. I like to throw fewer disputes in there. We hope to have like no disputes, but disputes can always drag things out. All right. Oops, project development. We're going to talk a little bit about the project development phase. There are basically 4 phases. I'm only going to talk about phases 2 and 3. We already have project selection, so we don't need to talk about that. And implementation, that's further on down the line. Kind of what we want to talk about today is the procurement phase and the award phase. I put a time frame on here for phase 2, the procurement phase, just so you guys get an idea. This is a typical time frame. And a lot of these things can be adjusted depending, again, on the complexity of the project, the commitments or obligations that have been made that we have to meet. So what I want to point out specifically is that this is just typical. We can expedite things if we have to, and in most cases we do. There's a lot of steps in the phase 2, the procurement phase. What we like to do is issue a letter of intent. It's basically we issue a letter to the industry, lets the industry know that, hey, we're thinking about doing a project. These are some of the things that will go into the project. And the purpose of that is to start building interest in the project from the private side. You want to build competition. You want to have people interested in your project. No response is required. Again, it's just a letter that goes out to the industry. Next step would be issuing a request for qualifications. We're required to do the 2-step process. The request for qualifications, basically, you send it out, you're asking for qualifications from people who are interested in pursuing your project. We go through the evaluation of the qualifications, and then hopefully you'll end up with a short list. If you get 10 people, 10 proposers interested, they may not necessarily all qualify, so you would go through an evaluation and a selection process for the short listing. Then we would issue a draft request for proposals. The whole purpose of this is to deal with the shortlisted team and to kind of throw out what we're thinking as far as terms and conditions for a contract and what we know, basic information that we know about the project. The whole point of this is that if there are any deal breakers or fatal flaws in the terms of the contract, we're going to know right up front. And maybe we have to realign risk or make some adjustments so that we have a better overall contract. Okay. Again, some of the information that's included in the draft RFP: scope of work, delivery, anticipated schedule, basic material. All right. We'll go through industry review process on the draft. That's where they come in and say, hey, look, term number 3, can't live with it, won't do it. If you leave it in, we're not going to have a project. So that's industry input, and it's really good to have. You can either do an open meeting where you invite all the shortlisted proposers in at once, or typically, in that case, you don't really. They can be beneficial, but not always super beneficial. Really, what you want are these confidential one-on-one meetings. That way you can talk directly to the proposers. They can tell you what they're thinking. The reason they don't want to do it in a big group meeting is because they don't want to tip their hat. They don't want to let the other proposers know kind of how they're thinking or how they're going to approach the project. All right, once we get the industry review, we put together the final RFP. That's basically coming as a result of the one-on-one meetings, the first set of one-on-one meetings after the draft was sent out. We send the final RFP to the board for approval. After all, you guys are going to be signing the contract. You're going to want to know what you're signing. And then once you sign it, we issue the final RFP. We continue to go through the process of refining the RFP with more one-on-one meetings. We get into some clarifications to kind of tighten up that contract, again, to adjust the risk as best we can. The final RFP has lots of documents. It's a lot of paperwork to go through that, but there are also basically a financial component, a technical component, and a legal component. All right, then we go through again another round of the industry review on the final. We issue addendums as we need to, and that's typical to issue addendums after you issue your final. Those addendums are based on these one-on-one meetings, and there can be more than one set of one-on-one meetings. And that's why you want a short list, because if you have to have individual meetings with 10 proposers, it just takes a long time. So if you can narrow it down to 3 or 4, you're doing pretty good. So we issue the last addendum, and that carries us into the next phase, phase 3, the award phase. Again, I put the time frame in here, total of 3 to 6 months for the award phase, but that's typical. We can certainly expedite things if we need to. A lot depends on the complexity of the project and what's involved. All right, the award phase, the receipt of proposals. Again, it's basically comprised of 3 components, the legal, financial, and technical, that come in from the proposers. We set up the evaluation process. It's very important. We work with a lot of your legal consultants on setting up the evaluation. It has to be defendable. You don't want to receive a challenge, and if you do receive a challenge to the selection, you want to make sure it's defendable. You pretty much setting up the whole process for evaluation, a lot relies on consistency. You have to be consistent as you go through that. All right. So once the evaluations are completed, there will be a report made, and then a recommendation for a selection, which again will be sent to you guys for approval. You're going to be signing your name on the dotted line. Want to make sure you agree with the selection. We go through, announce the selection. After that, the proposals are made public record with some confidential financial information that is not disclosed. Then we get into negotiations with the selected proposer, and these are basically kind of fine-tuning some of the terms, some of the conditions that we're going to be working with, call them final negotiations, things that can't be finalized until you have a proposer on board or a selection made. We reach final negotiations. The contract is basically put together after the final negotiations. Once again, it's sent to you guys for approval before it's signed. You guys approve it. And then we have contract execution. We go through with the signature process, and we have a design builder on board, and we have a great project. All right. Once again, this is the timeline, and this is a typical timeline. I want to stress this. These things can vary up and down. You'll see there's kind of big ranges in here, but this is a typical timeline. So if things need to be expedited because of obligations or commitments, we certainly have done that in the past, and we'll certainly continue to move forward doing that. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, questions?
Questions? Great presentation. Can we have the full presentation emailed to us? Because this is important to us, at least to me, and I think we need more detail on that now. Thank you. And then 2, do we have anywhere in this process the appeal process articulated in here? Or is it on the fly, or is it an industry standard, or does everybody know what the appeal process is and constitutes?
A challenge?
Yes.
Yeah, a challenge. That'll go through your legal advisors, and it's pretty much written up. It's produced within the contract documents. It explains what the challenge process is, how they would have to go through that.
The only thing I was going to ask you is I think what you're trying to do is point out the difference between a design build and a design bid build.
In a general way.
And so if there could be one page that you might put out that shows us the difference. I mean,
Sure.
In my opinion, there's little time differential, but your expectations pretty much are the same whichever way you go. And I like design build if it'll go, but we just need to clarify what the difference is between design bid build and design build.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I can, when I email you the presentation, the full presentation, I can add something to that.
An executive summary type document, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking in a design bid build, sometimes there's more inclusiveness and you allow smaller, it depends on how you break down your project, but you allow smaller contractors sometimes to participate. In a design build, sometimes you're only limited to your larger contractors and so.
Well, that makes sense, yeah, because and it's because they have to have enough liability to take on an engineering firm as well. So, yeah, no, I see your point, and I can certainly write that up.
Anything else? No. Thank you, Ms. Daly.
Sure.
Discussion and action on the adoption of the following policies. The CRRMA Conflict of Interest Policy for financial team members, and that's item A, and B, which I think they're fairly similar, are they not, Mr. Tejas?
Yes, sir.
Conflict of Interest Policy for consultants.
Raymond Tejas again for the record. These two, as the chair mentioned, are fairly similar, but one obviously deals with financial groups while the other deals with the rest of your consultants. These are essentially standardized conflict of interest policies that the rest of the regional mobility authorities use throughout the state, although we have tweaked them for El Paso's use. Once we made those revisions, obviously we sent them through our legal team, and they've stamped it as okay. Essentially, what we're doing is we're laying out a policy for which, if, for example, a financial team member realizes that there is a potential conflict, they have to identify it to us, and if you'll note on the attachment A, they have to fill out a form and provide it to us, and then at that point, we're on notice, and we run this process through the board to determine whether or not it is a conflict that is real, and if so, how do we get around it, or do we need to move on to the next financial team member? So that's essentially what these policies are for. Yes, sir.
Are these the ones we discussed at the executive committee meeting?
Yes,
in lieu of the governance committee?
Yes, sir, and that's right, actually, that's a good point. These were scheduled to go through the governance committee. We had issues with getting enough folks to the governance committee, so we routed them through the executive committee. The executive committee, subject to a couple of minor revisions, had made the recommendation that they be forwarded to the full board for approval. Thank you for that.
Mr. Tejas, I have a question for you. It's in the interest of continued transparency, is there a policy for maintaining our website and actually having this up on the website, as this talks about?
Yes, sir, and actually that's a really good point, and you'll see in the executive director's report there's a note there about our website. What happens when you all approve this is that we will place this on the web page for the RMA that we currently maintain. Okay. However, we are, without getting too far ahead, we're in the process of developing a website, and these policies will be placed on there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions, comments? Is there a motion to approve items 10A and B?
So
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carries. Item number 11, discussion and action on the possible revision of the following policies. The RMA bylaws, item A, and item B, the RMA policies and procedures governing the procurement of goods and services.
As a reminder, and this also went through the executive committee recently, but as a reminder to the board, I was tasked with, well, actually, I should identify the problem first. Originally, there was a line within the procurement policy of the RMA, and you have a copy of that as backup for 11B. There was a line in that conflict of interest provision of the procurement policy, which basically prohibited RMA board members from accepting lunches from virtually anyone.
Meals.
Meals, yes, sorry, meals. So the question was brought up, and I guess there was just a concern there because it wasn't, originally the board's intention was not to be that broad. So I was charged with going back and trying to fix this, and so what I had done was I spoke with our attorneys and who provides policies and conflict guidance for other regional mobility authorities in the state, and we came up with this proposed solution. So what you'll see is we've basically taken the original intent of the board and separated it into two sections. The first section deals with vendors, and that's under the procurement policy, which is item 11B, which you have in your backup. And what we're proposing to do here is essentially revise the language to read as follows. The board and employees are explicitly prohibited from accepting any meals, gifts, or other items of value from potential vendors during pending procurements of the CRRMA involving such potential vendors. Board members and employees are also prohibited from accepting meals, gifts, or other items of value from those individuals and firms reasonably expected to become a potential vendor to the authority. So in this policy, what we're doing is we're saying, bottom line, if there is a procurement going on at this time, you obviously cannot receive any meals or gifts or anything of value from that organization that is in that procurement policy. But beyond that, and this was a recommendation that came out of the executive committee, was to add a line that also said any individuals or firms that are reasonably expected to become vendors to the Regional Mobility Authority, board members should not be accepting meals, gifts, or other items of value from those folks either. So that was the intent behind the procurement revisions. Then beyond that, if you look in the backup for item 11A, which is your bylaws, if you look at page 5, then what you'll see under the conflict of interest provision there is the new addition of this line, which states as follows. Further, the board and employees are explicitly prohibited from accepting any meals, gifts, or other items of value from those individuals and firms identified as key personnel or key financial personnel within the applicable CRRMA conflict of interest policy. So what we're doing here is we're referring back to those policies you just adopted, and we're identifying those individuals that are providing services to the RMA in excess of $10,000, and those are what are termed key personnel, whether they're financial or regular consultants. So in other words, this provision then says anyone who is currently providing services to the RMA cannot provide meals, gifts, or other items of value to you either. So we're essentially explicitly excluding current vendors, potential vendors, and those that are providing services to the RMA. It's a long-winded way to get to where we were going, but I believe that I've covered the intent of the original board direction. And beyond that, as was mentioned earlier, these items went through the executive committee and are coming forward with a recommendation for adoption. Now, before we move on, I do want you all to discuss this first, but the bylaws, I've made some additional recommended revisions that we can discuss before we adopt those bylaws, should you be interested.
Are these changes you're requesting now over and above the ones made at the executive committee level? Or it's the same?
No, the same. They're the same.
What do you want to
Questions, comments?
I don't have a problem with the policy. I think it's a great policy. The problem here is how far we want to carry it. And I'm looking at the 4 of us and eventually the 6 or 7 or 8 of us, 9 of us if we ever get full. But recently, this RMA, and I pointed this out to our council, but recently the RMA won an award. And we went to New York to an organization that was sponsored by many of the vendors that we use. And as part of that award process, we're not a member of the association that provided us with the award, right?
Well, actually, it was a publication, so it's not really as far as I know, it's not a membership organization.
But it was sponsored. If I recall, that dinner was sponsored.
That's correct.
And it was sponsored by potential vendors to the RMA. So my question, I guess, is would we have been in violation based on this new policy? Because if I read it strictly in accord with what's written here, I could very well. I mean, we could mince words, but I mean, it could very well have been in violation of this policy as it's written.
Well, I can't provide a legal opinion on it, but I don't believe that we would be in that position because the organization that held the event is the organization
Sponsored by
that's correct,
vendors.
but there is that demarcation.
I think where I'm going here is, I think we all want a policy that, one, builds transparency, two, builds limited exposure, but I think we want it to be realistic. And, there are times where a chair, could be in Austin or even in El Paso, wherever, or one of the members of the board could be in a meeting with that is with an already selected contractor for whatever reason. I don't know. At one time, I think the policy we're displacing is a policy that had a limitation of dollars, and you and I had a problem even coming up with that. So I think this is better just to say it's just not going to happen at all. I just think, if we as a commissioner are ready to live with that, then fine. Then this is a fine policy. The policy is very clear. That would mean any binders or any gifts whatsoever given to us for any value whatsoever by any potential vendor or any potential contractor, period, blatantly is prohibited, not only from this board, but from future boards forever until they change this bylaw. And if that's one that this board can live with, certainly I can live with it as well. But I think the severity of what we're, and I guess the remedy would be removal from the board or recommended removal from the board, right?
Well, these are policies and bylaws, so they're a little less stringent than that. I mean, these are not, violation of your own internal bylaws do not equate to removal from the board.
We're not allowing, I guess anything would allow for the executive committee to allow a waiver on a policy like this.
That's
so
correct.
a predetermined waiver by the executive committee or the board as a whole would be allowed under this policy the way that you're writing it.
If I can give you,
I just want to make sure we're right.
I understand where you're going. Let me go back to New York and the dinner that was given to you. I don't think anybody would reasonably expect you to be influenced by any of the vendors that sponsored that dinner because it's a group of vendors and it was given to you by an organization.
And it was sanctioned. It was something we wanted.
Yeah, so I think that's not the intent of this, and I think it doesn't read that way. I think if you really read it, it's a vendor, a vendor providing you a meal or a gift or something of that nature.
I don't think we want to get down to that because if it's one or two or three vendors or one vendor, I think the policy is the same no matter what. So
True,
if two or three
but
get together and decide.
A dinner sponsored by a large group of vendors would not be part of this, and I don't think anybody in this room would even imply that in this.
I think as long as we're comfortable that we're willing to live by this policy, I just want to make certain that it's on the table and everybody understands what it is we're agreeing to live with. As long as everybody's agreeing to live with it, I think it's fine.
Yeah.
I just think it is what it is.
Exactly.
And so,
Well-
I don't think we should look for gray area. It is what it is.
Yes.
Well, Tanny, I'm the one that probably caused most of this consternation because
I really-
I had a problem with the first one the way it was, where no one could even buy us lunch regardless of who it was. Okay? So, for example, if an elected official, which these guys, doesn't happen to them, obviously, but occasionally an elected official might want to buy me lunch, that was prohibitive under the old deal. So we hashed this out, and we agreed, at least those on the executive committee, that when it comes to a vendor, we can live with it for the sake of transparency, for the sake of perception that if we're seen with a local vendor or a prospective vendor having lunch, having dinner, or having a few drinks, and they pick up the tab, that could be perceived as influencing
Right, totally
our
agree.
vote on this. So we decided that under no conditions will we accept anything whatsoever from a current or prospective vendor.
Or anybody that might want to cause undue influence.
Well, or
on
do
that.
business with us, see? And that's what we decided we
Like
wanted
I
to be
say,
as absolute as possible.
Honestly, Ralph and David, if we're willing to live with this policy, I think we're all willing to live with it, and I think that's fine. I just want to make sure it's practical and realistic, and that we apply. And we can try it, and we'll see
Well,
what happens.
it's a little impractical, and it is extreme, but I think at this point, we've agreed that we want to live with it, and we're going to try it.
And as a reminder also, these are living documents. I mean, and some of the revisions that you'll see that I'm proposing in the bylaws, this is still a relatively young organization, so as we begin to do bigger and better projects, we're going to see that some of these things aren't going to work. So we can always come back and revise them. So, I mean, I expect and I hope that you'll provide those comments to me as they arise.
Did you say that the language was very similar to languages in other RMAs and other communities?
Actually, to tell you the truth, I'm not aware of any other RMAs that have any prohibitions like this. This is the only organization that has this.
And, you know, I might add that the original wording in this 2 years ago was developed by Tanny and I think, and we were...
We were uncomfortable with it.
We were very comfortable, and I'm very comfortable with this, too. I think that, I don't think there's any reason that we shouldn't be as transparent as possible and avoid any potential implication that somebody's attempted to influence us in any way, so... the fact that we're the only RMA that has this should be something we're proud of, not necessarily one that we'd want to copy somebody else's.
Any other comments? I'd just like to say that, as far as I'm concerned, regardless of, this is the state guidelines are basically this. So whatever it does, regardless, if you're submitting anything to the state, you have to be in compliance with the state requirements. So I can look out across this room and there's any number of people that I've had lunch with, and hell, I had to buy their lunch. So, which is fine. I enjoyed the company, by the way. Mitch, I think you'll readily admit that, won't you? As you will, Tom. And so.
You enjoy conference?
So, well, actually, I tell them that, you know, you can have anything on the menu at McDonald's.
Hey, you're too generous.
Okay.
Move to approve then the changes as,
Actually-
that particular change.
Okay.
If I could go through the remaining
All right.
proposed revisions, then we can take them both at the same time. So you all have the proposed revisions of the bylaws, and they're all redlined for you, so I won't go through all of them. Excuse me, but I do want to mention a couple of them. By way of an example, on page 2, there are proposed revisions to the way that the statute governing RMAs deals with the addition of new members to a regional mobility authority. So I've revised subpart B of Article 6 to reflect whatever the state statute says will govern this organization as well. There's also a provision on page 3 under subpart G. I've added there is and again, this is a young organization, so we're learning as we go. But there's a provision in our bylaws that requires each of the members to provide certain certifications to the executive director that each board member is still permitted to serve as a board member. However, what I'm suggesting here is that because you all have to provide items to the state, whatever you provide to the state will serve as compliance with this provision. So it's a kind of a streamlining item there. And we've discussed under Article 10 the change there. And stop me if there are any of these that you have questions about that I'm skipping. I would mention on page 6, Article 13, that I'm requesting the creation of a new officer position for the board, and that is of alternate secretary. In the event that the secretary is not available, which we've had on a couple of occasions, it would be helpful to me to have someone else available to sign off on these documents to attest. So I'm requesting the addition of that new officer. And then under B, you'll note that, and this was as a result of conversation at the last board meeting, I'm looking to change the terms of the officers to 1 year, coincide with the 1 year appointments, or rather with the staggering, which essentially results in half of the board being up for reappointment each year.
And the purpose of that is nothing more than someone is elected to a
Two-year term.
Two-year term with 1 year.
I'd be serving on the.
That's right.
Okay.
That's correct. And related to that, in B also, I'm asking that the election actually occur in February, because as you know, board members are supposed to be reappointed by February 1 of each year. We had it as January for some reason, but that doesn't make a lot of sense, so I've asked that be pushed to the following month.
Considering that, Raymond, considering I think we have 2 reappointments and 1 new appointment kind of looking us in the face, should we not just change that to April?
We certainly could. The
mean,
problem with that, though, will be if you have a situation where you're appointing in April and then you have those board members leave in February, then you'll have a break, which is why I tried to keep it with February.
But I thought those board members maintained until they were
That is true. That is true. They do hold
replaced.
over. That's correct, actually. That's right. So move it to March.
Do we anticipate this taking till April to
Well, if
every
the way
year?
it's going now, it's going to be.
Yeah.
It's not on next week's agenda.
Well, I mean, we can leave it at February and hope that we don't have that problem in the future, but
What's caused the delay?
Danny, the last time I checked, they were having to do some additional research on you.
I think
But
when
I don't
people
blame them
found
for that. I don't blame them for that.
Danny, when people found out what they had to do for free to serve on this board, everybody dropped out of
Oh, they
that
couldn't find,
consideration.
is that what the problem was? They could not find?
I don't know.
No, they,
Oh, I mean,
I think,
my question is it going to be a delay that's going to happen every year?
Probably.
I really have no idea. We've requested, and we've provided every assistance that we can. I'm not exactly sure, actually. At one point, there was one individual that they were looking at, and then that individual refused. So it may be, I really don't know.
That
actually. I
shouldn't hold up the process as well.
Well, but the problem is that the process is that you have to the council has to identify 3 individuals for each position.
They have to.
They have to.
But, and those 3 have to
actually,
agree.
does not the mayor
The mayor identifies.
identifies 3 people for each position?
That's right, and
And then
then
the council
It has
picks.
to be 3.
that's correct.
I believe
And
so.
all 3 have to agree to want to be considered.
That's it. So you have 9 individuals that have to agree, which is causing the problem. And now that was originally we went through when I formerly with the city attorney's office when we developed that scheme. We proposed it in a different manner because we were afraid of this concern. But in the end, it went with the folks chose that route because they wanted to follow the pattern of the PSB. Which
Is
where
it
came from.
possible for us to come up with a different
Absolutely. it is.
methodology that might make this, I just don't want every year that,
Agreed.
everybody's going to have to come up for reappointment or not, or a new appointment. And we should be able to streamline this, and this should not be
And I'll do
a
that.
90-day process.
I'll speak with our attorneys and develop a better approach.
Thank you.
So leave it for February for now, I guess?
Yeah, but we'll leave it, I mean,
If they come up with
Sure.
something new, we don't have to worry about it now, but
That's true.
we don't need to make a motion to allow the current board members to continue.
No, sir.
It's just
law.
automatic.
That's correct.
So then, yeah, just let's see what they come up with.
Okay.
anything else, Raymond?
If you
I
don't-
believe on page 10, we changed not later than January 1st. We don't even have audited statements on January 1st, so we moved that back.
That's correct.
There are no other questions or comments. Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve
This is items 11A and B.
11A and B.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Okay, is there a motion to table the election of officers, item number 12?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
in light of the fact that Mr. Adama got a haircut today,
Yes?
in thinking that he might be up for election, I hate to disappoint him. However, I know at our last meeting, we tabled this until this meeting because we anticipated that council would have already appointed the new board members. Since they haven't, I suggest we table this, not necessarily till the next meeting, but until such time as the new appointments are made for the 3 positions up for consideration.
Is that acceptable?
Absolutely, and I'll bring it back at the meeting immediately following the appointment process.
Okay.
Is there a second?
I'll second, and I would just want to make a statement. I don't want this to be seen as an effort by me to cling to my vast power as vice chair and the amount of money that I receive for this position, so it's just a matter of procedure, folks.
Ralph, if
It's not me clinging.
your hair had been shorter, we'd have to call you Burrhead.
Yeah.
See, and by the great honor and respect I'm given as vice chair as well.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Item number 13, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing staff to finalize, print, and distribute the CRRMA's 2008 annual report in accordance with the recommendations of the Executive Committee, including the filing of an amended 2008 annual report with the City of El Paso. Mr. Tejas.
If I could clarify on this item, there is, under Texas Transportation Code Section 37261B, each regional mobility authority in the state of Texas has to provide a written report to, in our case, the City of El Paso, to provide information on 4 specific points. Now, what I'm suggesting that we do is, and in fact, the resolution is asking for authorization to do 3 things, and that is adopt the annual report as is provided to you all in your backup. The second is to authorize for the filing of the written report with the City of El Paso pursuant to that state statute. And the third would be to authorize staff to do any and all actions necessary to actually have this report printed similar to the strategic plan and disseminated to the public so that the public is made aware of what this regional mobility authority is up to as well. Those are the 3 things that I'm looking to do with this resolution. If there are any questions, you have this in your backup, but I would mention that there are 2 revisions that I would request be adopted as well, and those revisions are on page 15. If you'll note, one of the 4 requirements that one of the 4 items that we have to provide to the City of El Paso is almost a forecast or a view of any bond issuances that we anticipate for the coming year. In the last paragraph of the last line of the first paragraph, I noted that in response to the CRRMA's stated goal of expediting the completion of mobility projects, the CRRMA may issue bonds in 2009 related to the Americas Interchange and the Cesar Chavez projects. However, the Cesar Chavez projects, as we discussed earlier, are actually being funded through Proposition 14 bonds. So those are bonds that will be sold by the state, not by the Regional Mobility Authority. So that was an error that I'd like to correct. So I'd like to strike
that.
Yes, sir. I'd like to strike and the Cesar Chavez projects. And beyond that, I noticed, actually TxDOT assisted with a brief review of this, and they noticed that, and they noticed also under the estimated construction date in the table right below that error, Loop 375 Trans Mountain Northeast has an estimated construction start date of 2011. That's actually 2010 from our comprehensive mobility plan, so I'd like to correct that as well. But subject to those revisions, and more importantly, subject to any questions that you have, those are the 3 actions I'm requesting of the board.
Is there a motion to approve? Is there a second?
Seconded.
Any further discussion? If none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Item number 13 approved. Discussion and action on the Executive Director's Report.
Okay.
Mr. Tejas.
Yes, sir. One more, and we're almost out of here. 14A deals with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, which is more commonly referred to as the Stimulus Act. I just wanted to brief you all, as you all are very well aware, the Texas Transportation Commission awarded $96 million to the development of 2 additional direct connectors for the Americas project. As a reminder, Comprehensive Mobility Plan called for the RMA to develop 2 direct connectors at that interchange, and we are going to fund that at a cost of $70 million. Well, they've added additional funds so that we can actually complete 4. The question now before the community, and in fact, actually I should mention, when you're looking at the interchange, the northwest quadrant is where the initial 2 direct connectors were going to be constructed. And I'm not sure if IT was provided a copy from TxDOT of those direct connectors. If you do, I'd ask you to pull it up. However, so the northwest quadrant, those 2 direct connectors, which essentially, if you're heading out of town, heading east on I-10, then you would be able to directly connect onto 375 north. And the reverse was the same. So if you're heading south on 375, there we go. You'll note those 2 that are identified are the ones that, and to orient us actually, you'll see Loop 375 is heading from the bottom left up to the top right. So those 2 on the top, those 2 direct connectors are the direct connectors that are being pursued by the RMA under the Comprehensive Mobility Plan. So the question before the community now is which other 2 are going to be pursued. I attended the Transportation Project Advisory Committee meeting of the MPO this morning, where this item was taken up, and the recommendation that has come out of that organization is to pursue, now I've gone blank, is TxDOT here? I believe it's I-10,
I need a picture.
when you're heading towards downtown, I-10 west to Loop 375 south, is that correct?
I-10 west to Loop, yeah, that's correct. Again, Eduardo Calvo with TxDOT in El Paso. The recommendation that came out of the committee this morning was, as Mr. Teixeira was saying, is one of them to be the westbound to southbound. In other words, if you're coming into town, to be able to go to Loop 375 America southbound. And the other connector would be from Loop 375 northbound to I-10 west. In other words, if you're coming from the Zaragoza Port of Entry, to be able to go to downtown. So that would be the third and fourth connector.
That's right. So those are thank you. That's the recommendation that's come out of the Transportation Project Advisory Committee of the MPO, and that's being forwarded on to the Executive Committee of the MPO, which meets tomorrow, and I'll attend that as well, and I'll be able to brief you on that as well. Beyond that, the decision will actually be made by the TPB. And there we go. Those are the thank you, Mr. Calvo. So the final determination will actually be made by the Transportation Policy Board of the MPO, and that most likely will happen.
Has that been funded?
In early April. Beyond that, I will note. I'm going to act as though that didn't happen. I will note that our general engineering consultant, under that original $2.2 million that we received from TxDOT, has reviewed each of these areas to determine, most importantly from our standpoint, can we construct any four that is proposed by the MPO. And from our general engineering consultant, we believe that we can construct any of them. So at this point, the Regional Mobility Authority's position is, you tell us what you want us to build, and we can build it.
Agreed. Because the MPO will take this up and the Transportation Policy Board will vote on what they think is best for the community. Is that right?
Exactly. That's correct.
And from a cost standpoint, as long as we can build that within the resources that we have, we're indifferent.
Well, well, actually, more importantly, I think it's important to note that any four connectors that are built help the situation out there. So I think, our mission is to provide mobility solutions to the region, and any four of these do that. So we're comfortable with any four that are provided.
Eduardo, I'd just like to say, if your organization would come up with the other $150 million, we'll build the other four connectors too.
I'd like that very much too, and then we can do another happy face on the other quadrant. Just a comment, as Mr. Tays was saying, we all felt that the decision or the selection of the two additional, or number three, connectors 3 and 4, it should be a technical decision along with some policy. So we're looking at different issues like traffic that would be using these each of these movements, as well as constructability and all that. Clearly, for different reasons, people are going to have different choices and all that. But I think we're reaching consensus, and again, I think this is very important. We've said it before with when we met with your GEC, and Mr. Tays was at that meeting as well. And we've got to say it at every opportunity we have. The economic stimulus projects are on a very, very tight timeline. And we need to meet the first deadline, which is to be able to obligate the funds by March of 2010. So this presentation that you saw from Ms. Staley earlier about the design-build process and all that, think about the 6, 7, 8 months that it's going to take to get that contract signed. On top of all the things that we need to do with the commission, all the agreements, and all these wonderful things that need to happen. But we need to stress the fact that we're on very, very tight deadlines. So getting back at this decision of which connectors, we wanted to speed it up and have a decision, make sure that everybody is happy with the selection, so that we don't, we can't afford to be, discussing which connectors for 2 or 3 months. We don't have that luxury. So hopefully everybody will agree on this and we can move on.
Mr. Calvo, from our experiences in initially requesting funding, we ran into a number of roadblocks as far as whether it was procedurally correct, whether it met the legal guidelines of state statute, the internal guidelines of TxDOT. Are we we're through those bumps in the road at this point? Would you agree with that?
Not completely. Some of the additional agreements that need to happen, number one is we're still, unless something happens, this project is still under a pass-through toll mechanism. In other words, it has to be developed under that.
And I understand that there's still a process that we have to follow. What I'm trying to get at is we went for months and nothing happened, and all of a sudden you guys received technical assistance, help, response from the administration in Austin and other areas, and are you feeling better about that? And I don't want to put you on the spot as far as throwing rocks at the administration in Austin, but it seems to me that TxDOT has been bending over backwards to try to help us get these projects done.
Absolutely.
That's all I'm trying to say.
And you're right. I think it took a while for everybody to understand what we were trying to do here in El Paso with the RMA, with the mobility plan and all that. And it did take a while to get everybody on board and understanding all the complexities of all these different projects. Because they're not the traditional development, including the TRZ, the design build elements, all these different, it's not the traditional way of doing things. But we've got the full support of the administration. As Mr. Tellez said, next week the commission hopefully will approve the application, the toll equity application, and typically they do these. They like to wait 2 months between actions. The commission is going to not wait that month. It's going to go from 1 month to the other, and so that's an indication that everybody is on board and helping us. We've got to do our part, the technical part and all the agreements and all that, but I feel very good now about the support that we're getting.
Very good. I don't know of a time since I've lived in El Paso that I've seen this much activity going to happen so quickly in our community. So it's a pretty exciting time. Thank you.
Okay.
Raymond?
Moving on to 14B. I thought I would brief you all between the last RMA board meeting and this one. I went to the Team Texas annual meeting, which was in Austin, Texas in February of this last month. And just to brief you on that organization, there were briefings on stimulus and the legislative activities to date and what was coming. Representative Pickett gave a talk to our organization as well, which was actually really quite good, and also the governor's office was there as well. So it was another very useful conference where, among other things, I was able to speak with other organizations like ours throughout the state. So we continue to make connections throughout the state, which is still very useful. There were elections held also, I would mention that. So the new chair of the Team Texas organization is Tab Bell out of the Northeast Texas Regional Mobility Authority, with a vice chair of Dennis Burleson out of the Hidalgo County RMA. I would mention also I was elected the vice chair of the legislative committee, so we're keeping an eye on the legislative activities in Austin. So we're staying in touch, and we're trying to become an active member of the organization as well. And our next meeting will be in San Antonio in late June or early July. So I'll continue to keep you posted on that organization as well.
How did your introduction of Chairman Pickett go that day? I understand that.
I think it went quite well. I'm not sure how he thought of it. Actually, I was pulled aside just moments before Representative Pickett was to take the stage and was asked to make a couple of remarks. So I spoke really, the gist of it really was to speak about the new unity that the community has, and how I attribute a lot of that to Representative Pickett as well as Commissioner Houghton, and all of the leaders in this region are really coming together like I've not seen before either. So I thought it was a good introduction, but you'd have to ask him.
Did you make a comment about his love for the RMA?
No, he actually made one. Yeah. Beyond that, just as a very brief update, we are in development of a website for the Regional Mobility Authority, as I mentioned earlier. The city's IT group is assisting us with that through, as you remember, we have a management agreement which also calls for in-kind services, which are inclusive of the development of a website. So we'll have one online soon, and hopefully when we have a working prototype, I'll send it to you all so you can review it and provide some comments as we go. So hopefully we'll have that up soon. And lastly, I just wanted to update you. This came up at last month's meeting. We are in development of a request for qualifications for underwriters. And that will be, we hope to release that early next week with fairly quick turnaround. And as Mr. Marcus mentioned, we will be using the Finance Committee for the selection process in that process. So I just wanted to give you all an update, and of course I'll provide you with a copy of that RFQ once it hits the street so that you know what's out there.
Very good. Any questions of Mr. Tejas?
Good job.
Is there any other business? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Thank everyone for coming. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? This meeting is adjourned.
Very good job. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.